Hey guys, and welcome back. So for this week, your assignment is going to be to take a piece of footage that was shot during the daytime outside and then do some color correction work where you convert that into a piece of footage that feels or looks like it was shot at night. Okay, so along with that conversation, so that's going to be your assignment, okay? Along with that conversation comes one, I will give you a piece of footage that you can use. But I would prefer if you guys go outside and record something on your cell phones or your smartphones or something like that. I would prefer that. But if not, you will have the piece of footage that I give you, and you can use that as well. Okay, so there's a few things that we need to talk about when we're discussing color correction and things like that. So a couple terms that I want you to be familiar with are things like color space and also nonlinear versus linear workflows and what those are in regards to, and also lookup tables. Now, I'm not going to give you lookup tables, and I'm not going to discuss that right now with you guys, but I do want you to be familiar with what those are. Essentially, what those are is if somebody does some color correction work, they can send the entire team that color correction work as a lookup table, and then it'll make sure that everybody has the exact same color correction, right? And so it can be a really useful tool to make sure that everything is color corrected the same way and has a look that feels and matches across shots. So I am not going to get into that for this assignment though, because it's not directly related to this assignment. I will try to send you a video on that later on how to set that up and apply lookup tables and things like that. But that doesn't pertain to this assignment, so we're not going to do that right now. First off, let's talk real quick about color space, and then we'll talk about linear versus nonlinear workflows. So color space. So if we go back in time a little bit, mid 90s or whenever they were doing all this, and I think this was Microsoft and HP. So what they found is that files that were on your hard drive, if they traveled, and we're going to say this blue line is your gamma, okay? So if they traveled a linear gamma line, okay, a straight line, to get to your computer monitor, once it got to your computer monitor, it was too dark. So what they found is that they needed to push this whole line into a gamma push of 2.2, and so they needed to bump the gamma of this whole line and make it 2.2, okay? And so it gave a curved line like this red one, okay? So this red line is essentially this blue line with a gamma correction of 2.2. And they found that the images that were on your hard drive, as they traveled this red line, once they got to your monitor, they started to look correct, okay? And now, technically though, for individuals like us that are going to do color correction or doing 3D renders or things like that, it can cause some problems, okay? And so we need to understand the difference between nonlinear and linear, all right? And so back in the day, so there is a difference between sRGB and linear sRGB, but let's talk about sRGB. So this stands for standard red, green, blue, and that was typically how this operated, okay? So it was perfect for the web and things like that. But it needed a gamma bump of 2.2 to make things look correct. Okay, so that can cause problems. For instance, let's just say that we have a value of, let's just say 1 somewhere along this linear curve, okay? So if we do some color correction work where we times it by itself, okay, that's going to be equal to 1. Okay, but let's say that we gamma correct this 1 by 2.2, so now you're going to have 3.2 times itself 3.2. That is not going to be equal to 3.2, right? That's going to be equal to like 10 or something like that. Let's see. So 3.2 times 3.2, and that's 10.24, right? So you can see that this workflow, this nonlinear workflow, made things incorrect, okay? And it's not that you don't get an output or something like that. It's that you get an incorrect output. So even if you work in an sRGB and you're doing color work and color correction and pushing curves around and multiplying things and doing different transfer modes, it's not that you don't get an output. It's just that your output is incorrect. And honestly, if you look at work that's been pipelined through a nonlinear versus a linear workflow, you will notice that the nonlinear workflows, things that are bright usually get blown out, and things that are dark usually get crushed real quick. Whereas the linear workflows have just a way more dynamic range, and they look so much better. Okay, and that's essentially what's going on. Okay, and so some of the workflows to get this 2.2 back to this, right? We always need to bump it at some point to get it to look correct for the monitor, but we don't want it to happen the second it comes off the hard drive, right? We don't want to do 2.2, get it into After Effects, and then do all this work when it's been had a gamma bump, right? We want to have that gamma bump not happen until the very end, right before it goes to our computer screen. Okay, and so some of the traditional workflows would actually push this curve by a 0.4545, and then you would get like this type of curve, right? So you would take this 2.2 and you would push it all the way down here, and it would really end up giving you this line back in the middle. For example, let me show, this might make a little more sense. So 2.2 times 0.4545, and essentially that gets you back to 1. And so these were some traditional workflows, and a lot of times this happens underneath the hood, and so you don't have to worry about this so much, but you need to understand essentially what's happening. We want to work with this linear workflow, this blue line, and not have our gamma bump until the very end. Okay, so color space. So that's a little bit about nonlinear versus linear workflows. So linear, good. Nonlinear, you can do it. It's just not as good as a linear workflow. Okay, so we'll talk about that in After Effects on how to get that set up and work a little more appropriately and things like that. But yeah, you typically want to work with this. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, linear, good. Nonlinear, not so much. Okay, so color space. What is it? Why is it important to understand? Color space is, you can think of it as, this isn't technically correct. Like when I say color models, that's not technically correct. It's essentially like how the colors are organized and that sort of stuff. But you could think of it in a sense as color models and color schemes. And it can be important to understand also how to pick different color spaces, because you might work for a client that's working in such and such a color space, and for your stuff to match, especially if they hand you off lookup tables, for your stuff to match their stuff, you're going to need to make sure that you're working, well, likely, I'm assuming they'd be in linear, but maybe not. But you would want to definitely make sure that your color space matches their color space. Or if you go to a studio, you want to find out what color space that studio is working at, or vice versa, right? So whoever you're working for, you want to make sure that your color space matches theirs. So it's a very important conversation to have, and it'll make sure that things match up and everything looks consistent and looks good. Okay, so that's color space, and that's also a little bit of a discussion on nonlinear versus linear workflows, and how all that kind of relates and why it's important and so forth. Anyways, I hope that kind of makes sense. We're going to next jump into After Effects, and I will show you how to set up linear workflows, and also when you might want to convert that back to sRGB or use linear sRGB. Get that out of the way. And then also how to set like color profiles and things of that nature. So, all right, anyways, let's go ahead and jump on over to After Effects. All right, let's jump into After Effects. I'm going to drag and drop this in here. Okay, and let's make some folders, comps, footage, images. Cool. Open all this up. Put my footage in my footage. And then I'm going to drag and drop my footage out here. Okay. Cool. So this is set up. Now, what I want to talk about real quick is setting up your color space and setting this to be a linear workflow. And so what you want to do is if you come down here, you'll see this a number, and it's going to say like 8 or 16, and then it's going to say BPC. And so that stands for bits per channel. And so bits per channel is like how many ranges of color you can have. So if you had like a bright going all the way to dark, you could almost see like these little stair-steppy kind of bands when it shifts colors. And the more bits you give it, the smaller those will be, and it's just going to look better, right? Okay, so let's click on this. And so right off the bat, I'm going to change the depth to 16 bits per channel. You could change that to 32 bits per channel as well. I'm just going to do 16 for now because it's definitely significantly higher than 8 bits. I rarely ever work at 8 bits. I'll work at 16 though. Okay, the next thing we want to do, so we talked a little bit about the working space of sRGB. We do have this linearize box right here. So you typically want to make sure that this is checked. So if you're working at sRGB and you want to do it at linear, right? So that was essentially where we did this. Okay, and you get back to that blue line. You could do that sRGB, but in a linear format. This would be fine. Now, oftentimes though, you're going to be asked to change your color space, and so this is going to be a very important conversation to have with whoever you're working with. And so, yeah, that would be one of the first questions that I would ask if I was hired on, say, freelance for something, is what color working space should we be operating at? Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and we're going to change this to something that's used quite a bit, especially for TV, is this HD TV Rec 709. And so this is used quite a bit, so this can be a good workflow to do. And this is what we're going to do for our stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK. Okay, so first off, let's get this comp back over here, and I'm going to rename this to original. Cool. Now, this next part, you don't need to do this exact next part, okay? I just want to demonstrate something super quick. So we've set up our color space. We've set it up to 16 bits per channel. So we've got all this stuff set up, right? HDTV Rec 709. I want to show you an issue and how to fix it real quick. So I'm just going to render this out. You don't need to do this, but I just want you to be aware of this and a little fix. So I'm going to go ahead and click render. We're going to get that out there. So this footage that I'm rendering right now is being rendered at the linear color space that we've set up, and it's also being rendered with the color profile of HDTV Rec 709. Okay, and so we're going to get that out there, and then we're going to take a look at that. And we're going to get that back in here, and we're going to take a quick look at that. So we'll give that just a second. Okay, so let's get this imported. Okay, After Effects, wake up. Okay, I'm going to drag this in here. Again, you don't need to do any of this. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. Now, if I turn the eyeball on and off for the original, you'll see that working space of the HDTV Rec 709 actually made this darker. So I want you to be aware of what you need to do. Like if you're working at that color space or a color space and you import it and it changes its values, like how to get that back to normal. So what you need to do is you actually need to tell After Effects what color space this should be, right? This was rendered out with HDTV Rec 709, so we need to change it until After Effects if that's a color profile that this should have. So I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to go down to interpret footage and main and color management. Okay. And then this assign profile, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to again go find HD TV, Rec 709 and click OK. And now if I turn the eyeball on or off, you'll see that there is no longer any change between the color profiles. Now, once you're ready to, like you've done all your color work, you would want to render out at that color space. And then if you needed to bake it into like sRGB, then all that work, you render it out, boom. Then you could import it back in here, set that back to sRGB, and then re-render that to kind of bake it down. But this is what I would encourage you to do for now, just so if you're passing things back and forth between individuals, everything will match and everything has the correct or matching color space between you and whoever you're working with. So we're going to operate at HD TV Rec 709. Okay, so I'm going to delete the original real quick, and let's move into building our assignment. Okay, with our day to night layer selected, I'm going to go up to Effect, down to Color Correction, and I'm going to add a tint. And then I'm going to immediately go back up, go back to Effect, Color Correction, and Curves. Okay, so for the tint, I'm going to make that 80%. And then for the curves, I'm going to take this point on the bright side. I'm going to pull that down. There's a box right here. I'm going to pull that down into this very bottom box about 2/3 of the way up from the bottom. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from RGB, which is the full color, and I'm going to change it to just red. Okay. And I'm going to come and I'm going to click here in the middle of the red, and I'm just going to de-gamma or take some gamma out of the red. Okay. And then I'm going to change this to blue, and then I'm going to bump the blue gamma. Okay, cool. So at this point, I think you can see we're already starting to get something there. So the next thing we want to do, because the sky is a little overexposed, we want to go ahead and darken this down. So let's do this. Let's go up to Layer. Let's go to New. Let's go down to Solid. And with this solid open, before I click OK, I want to come here and on the little color, I want to click on the color. Okay, so I have a little code here for you. So let's look at the code. And what I want to do is I want to type 00031F. All right, cool. And so from here, let's go ahead and drop down the transparency to 50%. Okay, and so to get the opacity up, I'm just going to click T for transparency, and then I'm going to type 50 there. So yeah, T for transparency, it brings you up the opacity. So that's kind of how that works. Why it's not an O instead of a T, I don't know, but T brings you up your opacity. Okay, so for the mode, again, if you don't see mode, go to the column that says source or layer and right click on that. Go to columns and just make sure you've got a check mark next to modes. Okay, so from here, let's go ahead and click where it says normal. And let's change this to saturation. All right, cool. Now if I come over here to this little eyeball, I'm going to turn that on and off, and you can see that it just gives it a little more of a blue feel to it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, the blue layer, or the blue solid. So I'm going to do Control D to duplicate. Okay, and I want to change the saturation to overlay. Okay, now let's also do another thing. Let's click T again to bring up the opacity, and let's change this to 60%. All right, cool. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my middle mouse button, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to come over here to where we have our rectangle tool. And just remember, if you click and hold, you'll see all of these, but I want rectangle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my middle mouse. I've rolled out, right? So I want to be able to drag a big box. And I want to drop it maybe around here somewhere. Okay? And the reason why is we're going to feather this, but I don't want it to feather on the sides or the top, right? So that's why we gave it a ton of extra room on the sides and the top. And we just want it to feather down, because right now if we click off, we're going to see this hard blue line, and we don't want that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to feather this. And so if I click on the deep blue solid, I'm going to click F for feather, and that's going to bring up the feather. And I'm going to change that to 100. And that's going to give us a really nice feather. Okay, I'm going to click right here and go to fits. Cool. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to create a track, okay? Because we're going to track in some glowy windows. And so for that, I'm pulling my window over here, right? So if you hover over it, you'll see this, and you can resize the window. And the reason why I'm doing it is I didn't really see the project. I can try to click over here, but I'm going to have a hard time getting it in there. You can see I just closed the effects. So if you do that, you can just pull this out over here, and then you can see the projects and the effects and things like that. Okay, and don't worry about the effects. We'll get it back as soon as we drop down another effect. So it's pretty easy to get back on. Okay, so at this point, let's take this day to night footage and let's drag this onto this little icon right here, and that's a comp icon. So I'm going to drag and drop that onto that, and it's going to make me a new composition. Now, it made a new composition here, so I'm going to drag that new composition up into our comps, and I'm going to call this final. Okay, and so now we need to do some 2D tracking. And I'm going to go through this a little quicker. I'm not going to explain as much because I sent you a video on 2D tracking, and I kind of talked that out a little bit more. But I'm just going to hit the high points for this. So we're going to try to add some glows into these windows. And so we need to track this first. So making sure I'm at the very beginning of my comp, I'm going to come to this layer. I'm going to right click, and we're going to go up to track and stabilize and over to track motion. Okay, now that drops a track point in here. The one thing, just as a reminder, try not to pull that out of the middle. Okay, so I'm going to do Control Z. I'm just going to grab somewhere inside this inner box, and I'm just going to move this over here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Cool. Cool. So I want more than just that though, right? I want the second track point. And the way we do that is if we come over here, we'll see our tracker. Let's go down and let's check the box for rotation, and I'll drop a second track point on there for us. So I'm going to click inside this box. And there's actually, if you see in here, there's actually like a window back here in the trees. So I'm going to try to track this as well. Something like this. So again, just a reminder, you want to get areas that have good contrast. That's going to help the program, right? So we have some brights, and then we have darks. And kind of the same thing over here. Oops. Oh, it just really wants to zoom in on that one checker. We have darks and then brights, right? So we're giving it some good pixels to track. Okay, so with that all done, we've got those two track points set. I'm going to come here, I'm going to click the play forward, and we're going to track the footage all the way to the end. So let's go ahead and click that button, and let's let After Effects do its thing. Cool. So let's do this. First things first, let's take this and let's put it all the way at the beginning of our time slider. Let's get all the way to the beginning. And this has essentially tracked a couple points for us, but it's not assigned. It hasn't done anything with the data. It's just given us some data. So we need to assign something to this track information. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a new null. So let's go up to Layer, down to New, and over to Null. I'm going to rename this null Tracker. And then over here in the tracker, I'm going to go to Edit Target. I'm going to click on that. And let's just make sure that here the layer says Tracker. I'm going to click OK. So we've got our track done. We've got the target set. And then we're just going to click Apply. And X and Y. And we're going to say OK. Cool. So now we've got this little null that will stick in place to the window. Now, if you slide around and try that out, that's fine. Just get this all the way back to the beginning. And then I'm going to collapse the tracker. Okay, cool. So let's make a new null. So let's go to, or a new solid. So let's go to Layer, New, and let's go to Solid. We're going to make a glowy solid for our windows. And so let's go ahead and click on this little color swatch again. And I have a new code here for you. So for this code, let's type in FF6600. Okay. Okay, and so let's go ahead and turn off the eyeball for our orange layer. And just as a reminder, our middle mouse button, if we roll that in or out, that zooms in or out. Our space bar allows us to grab our canvas and move around. And now let's go ahead and select our pen tool. And so from here, we just want to make sure that we have our orange solid selected, because if I don't have anything selected and I start drawing stuff, I'm going to make a shape layer, which we don't want, so I'm going to delete that. And so even though the eyeball is off for the orange layer, I can still use the pen tool on it, right? So we just have it off so that we can use our day to night as a guide. And so from here, the eyeball's off, but it's still selected. I'm going to go in real quick and rough. And if you hold Shift, you can make some pretty good straight lines. Let's try again. Holding Shift, I can make some pretty good straight lines. Okay. And again, I'm going to come back to the first one and close it. And so you can see I've made two masks now. And so I'm going to keep going. Hold Shift, Shift, and again, I'm going to come back to the first one and close it. And make another one. We'll close that one. And this looks like it might be a door or something. Can't quite tell. So I'm going to make another one right here too. Cool. And then we're going to go find that one that was in the trees. And so we'll just do this one the best we can. So I'm looking here. Cool. All right. So immediately, once the second I'm done drawing these windows, I'm going to get off the pen tool because I don't want to accidentally make another mask. So I'm just going to click on the main selection tool. And now I'm going to turn on the eyeball for my orange solid. And you can see that I have some orange solid layers in there. They look a little too perfect, so let's feather those out a little bit. So I'm going to click on the orange solid, and I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to do F for feather. And then you're going to see that it's going to give me all the feathers for all the masks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first mask, on the actual word mask 1, and then I'm going to shift click on mask 7. And then it doesn't matter which one of these feathers I pick. I could do the first one or the last one. I'm just going to click on one of those numbers. I'm going to type in 5 and hit enter. And so now I've feathered that. I'm going to collapse that. Click off. Now I've feathered that, and so these aren't quite as hard as they were. Okay. Bring this back down. And let's do a fit. So the next thing we want to do, again, making sure we're all the way at the beginning, right? Because that's where that has been rotoscoped to. What we want to do is, if we look at the orange solid, there is a little pick whip all the way to the right here. And the pick whip essentially connects things to something else. So I'm going to click on this pick whip, and I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to point to the tracker. Okay? And I'm going to let go. And we can see that it's set this to the tracker. And so now if I drag through the timeline, you can see that this orange solid has been attached to this null, and this null is moving around to match the footage, and so now is the orange solid. Okay, cool. So last thing we want to do is let's click on the orange solid and let's go to its mode and let's go to screen. And cool, so now we're screening that over this footage. So, but the problem is, right, that we've got these nice orange glowing windows, but it's just over this regular day footage, which was great to track, right? Gave us good reference to work off of. We could rotoscope it real easy. But now we want to come in here and we want to get the day to night color correction version into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here. I'm going to click on the composition original. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag. And I'm going to drag it to where I see the blue line pop up between our 1 and 2 layers, right beneath the orange layer. And I'm going to let that go. And now we can see that we have, so if I click spacebar, we can see that we've got this tracked footage. Let's try that again. And so now if I click spacebar, play through that. Or again, if you come up to preview, you have a little play button. That'll do the same thing. So I'm just previewing the footage and seeing how it's looking and the track. I think that looks okay. To me, I feel like this is all still a little bright. So one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go to layer and new and adjustment layer. And we just want to make sure that the adjustment layer is on top of everything. And I want to add a curves to this. So with the adjustment layer selected, I'm going to go to effect, down to color correction and over to curves. Cool. And so this is going to give us a really nice way to dial this in. And if I click here on RGB and I just pull this down and I take some of the gamma out, you'll see that we've just darkened things up. Or if your director, you know, for example, art director wanted it to be a little brighter, you could do either or. So this gives you a way to just dial in the brightness of your day to night conversion. So I'm going to do something like that. And let's just get a quick preview of that. Fit. And let's cache this out, or you can click play. And I'm just getting an idea for how this is working. So my recommendation is to go ahead and, you know, track some stuff in here, do your color corrections and that sort of stuff. But yeah, track some things in here. Like if there's some street lamps or something like that, track those and get some lights added to it, right? That's going to be the sort of stuff that's going to help this feel not just like something that's been color corrected, but that you're adding things like lights and whatever. Or if you have a car driving by, maybe you add some headlights or whatever the case may be. So anyways, this is essentially your assignment. I want you to color correct a day shot and convert it into a night shot. And then you will upload that as a compressed video on Blackboard again. And yeah. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. And if you have any questions, definitely hit me up.